Hi students, it's me again. So we're going to finally talk about development and what this means for migration, especially push and pull factors and economic reasons why some places are attractive, not just economic, but infrastructure reasons too. So infrastructure is a word I've been throwing around in several lectures now. And so we're really going to look at it in this video. And if we have time to do it all in one, probably not, we're going to look at a curated video together. We're going to look at it on YouTube about sanitation conditions in Brazil, for instance. So Brazil is on the map here, this very large area, and we mentioned Brazil in the forced immigration lecture because Brazil was a Portuguese colony at one point, and of course the Portuguese slave trade was one of the major historic slave industries in the African diaspora. And so I'm going to look at Brazil again, since we were looking at that from one of the maps in chapter 3. We're going to look at Brazil compared to what kind of infrastructure and daily life folks there might experience. And therefore it could be a push factor that might enable people who have the resources and the means to willingly immigrate with an E from that area immigrate with an I into what area? I don't know. It depends upon the pull factors and the resources that some of these dynamics between countries and infrastructure and development levels have. Okay, so I've got the map that's behind me on the screen here is the three worlds model. You might have heard of first world, second world, third world. We're going to look at these kind of differing styles of life pretty intimately in the weeks to come, because it's important for us not to just be geographers who are we just look at maps and we have like sterile information to analyze and talk about, but we're talking about humans in our human geography or cultural geography class. And it's important for us to be able to understand from the point of view of someone living in an area what life is like. We can dryly talk about push and pull factors, but if we don't understand what daily style of life is and the resources that are or are not available for some in some places compared to us in our daily lives, it's not really a full education without being able to understand or walk a day in their shoes, so to speak, to use that cliche. So we're going to look at the degree to which levels of development in an area can contribute to the push or pull factors for migration. So in chapter 3, it talks about islands of development, and this is perhaps a foreshadowing. One of the reasons why I'm going to bring chapter 10, or why this topic is from chapter 10, and we're going to talk about it along with chapter 3, is because this is a major source of migration, the levels of development that exist. And the islands of development are typically defined as cities or places where people are having economic development and economic investment into an area. So even in low income nations where the population has a very low education level, very low resources, water safety and sanitation resources are not available, or electricity is not available, these kinds of things are not available to the population in the outskirts or the periphery of a core like an industrialized city where economic life is buzzing and investment is available. Those kinds of pull factors push from the outside periphery to those cities that bring job opportunities, educational opportunities, better housing, etc. So development is key, and it typically means a degree of infrastructure, of political safety, of economic participation. It has a great of industry, of jobs, etc. It has a great deal of effect on the style of life that people live. So you probably have heard of the three worlds approach to classifying nations between each other. First world, second world, third world. This map shows you those distinctions by these three colors. So you see here, the former nations of the USSR and China are considered to be second world nations. We're not going to talk about them so much in this video. That'll be for a later time. We're going to look at differences in first world compared to third world nations. And I point to the USA when I say first world. We are in a first world nation. And I'm not going to highlight our style of life so much, because whether you come from the middle classes or the upper classes or the lower income classes in the United States, we have a great deal of infrastructure that we take for granted. We have a great deal of life safety and health conditions that we take for granted because we have so much infrastructure available. In Brazil, the country that I'm going to show you in this video, there is not the same level of development. There's not the including infrastructure like sewage systems, clean water systems, even roads and streets, or certainly electrical availability. The grid, the power structure is not necessarily available to citizens the way you have come to expect it. It's unusual if we find a place that within our activity spaces that does not have resources like clean water, sewage availability, whether it's a septic tank or a city sewer system, municipal sewer system. Most all of the places in the USA that are currently habitable have access to those kinds of things. Electrical grid, and internet, certainly through 5G and these kinds of things. We have a lot of resources that are included in our infrastructure. Additionally, not just those kind of utilities that are included in our infrastructure, but also roads, bridges, shipment systems, factories, stores, distribution centers, all of those kinds of things are part of the infrastructure that exists. So roads and bridges, when they are being rebuilt, that is an investment in infrastructure. And some countries, such as the United States, do that often and regularly so that these things are safe and useful for everyone involved. Other countries that do not have the same economic base or the same governmental system with accountability for where things are, where money is spent and on what projects money is spent. Sometimes there's only one city, one region within an entire geopolitical country that has those resources because the rest of the country has not been attractive to that kind of investment or development. And usually that's a distinction, a major distinction between third world and first world nations. So I think we have time to look at this video that I have curated for you. Actually, let me move that here. It's an example of a town in Brazil. That you can see on this hillside. Houses are just built one on top of the other in this terraced hillside, and there's one road that leads up through here. I don't know if you can see the way my arrow is following this. There's one road that leads up through, kind of spirals up this mountainside so that people have general access to their houses, but not entirely. There's not just a driveway straight to an apartment or to a home. And this infrastructure has been neglected as this population boom through migration or through birth and death rates. They had to live someplace. And so infrastructure was built that maybe these houses would be included in infrastructure. This infrastructure was built that perhaps did not include all of the necessary technology to have electricity, to have proper sewage, to have proper sanitary water pathways, or even clean water piped into all of these houses. And so let's just watch what some of this, what the daily life is in a family's household that lives in these conditions in the third world.
This is Franco da Rocha, a suburban town on the outskirts of São Paulo. About a third of the 150,000 people living here, like those in the Parque Pretória community, have no access to proper sewage and sanitation systems.
If I think 10 years back, things have improved around here, but the sewage collected in the houses is still dumped directly here on this stream. Garbage collection is also very deficient. The truck doesn't go to some streets here in our neighborhood.
Despite its problems, Franco da Rocha still fares better than Brazil's average. Government figures based on 2016 data show that nationally a full 45% of the population lack access to adequate sewage. And government researchers say that's directly related to a new finding, that last year nearly 35% of Brazilian cities were severely hit by diseases related to poor sanitation, like dengue fever, diarrhea, Zika, parasites, cholera, and leptospirosis. Maria de Lima's son died this year of leptospirosis, a bacterial disease spread through the urine of infected animals, like rats. He was 30 years old and had an intellectual disability.
He used to go and bathe in this river sometimes. When we saw him, we would get him out immediately. But sometimes we would see him all wet returning home.
Investment in sanitation infrastructure usually has to be very high to make an actual impact. For example, building water and sewage systems is not cheap nor easy. But experts warn that if the investment is not made, even more resources are needed in the future to deal with the diseases that appear as a consequence. The local government in Franco da Rocha has launched outreach programs to monitor conditions and educate residents, warning, for example, about the dangers of flood waters. But the acting health secretary says heavy investment from state and federal authorities is essential for a definite solution to the problem.
Research done in Brazil, in Europe, and more recently in Africa shows that for every dollar invested in sanitation, can avoid spending $16 down the road on healthcare. It's obvious. You avoid contamination.
Addressing the sanitation deficiencies in a country the size of Brazil, with a population of more than 200 million people, is a huge challenge, but one experts say is critical to protecting the health of this developing economy. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Franco da Rocha, Brazil.
There we go. So you heard a ton of very quickly delivered concepts from our development chapter, and that also are relevant to the push and pull factors of our migration chapter. These resources in infrastructure are taken for granted for the most part in our country because we have fully developed and invested in water resources, for instance, electrical grid, sanitation. You saw garbage in a dumpster loaded there in that video. We have a lot of systems in place to collect our garbage and take it away and dispose of it in a sanitary manner. So this video was uploaded in 2018. That's not so old comparatively. In other words, this neighborhood has not changed much, if at all, probably downgraded somewhat from neglect and lack of investment over time. This is the condition that many people experience. Actually, you might remember from the beginning of this video, the narrator said that this particular town they're looking at was a better example than most of the smaller villages that are in Brazil. And so this is a better example than you will find in most of the places in the third world. Let's get back to that map over here. I've spent a lot of time in Honduras and Mexico, Guatemala myself over the years as a participant observer, and some of the roads were washed out by hurricanes, never built again. People don't have access to shipment from the coast or from airports. These parts of infrastructure were never built back when the government resources to do that or the private investment to do that was lacking. And these are some major push factors for people to decide to leave their country of origin to try to permanently reside in other areas of the world, particularly the the first world is usually the attracting place. So in our next video, we will look further into development and what it means for daily life.